Hello, good evening, and welcome. You've just entered the arena. I'm Michael Coren, and you know what? It doesn't take a political scientist to know that the Keystone Pipeline received enormous negative publicity, partly because Hollywood celebrities decided to make it one of their chosen causes. Now, whatever the merits and failings of the case, most Americans didn't really care. And if they were offered Canada rather than Saudi Arabia, they would obviously have opted for their best friends rather than their potential worst enemies. 2010 was the last time I watched the gruesome Oscar ceremony with Hollywood celebrities. I remember the list, this is great, the list for best documentary. A Burmese man risking his life to take a hidden camera into his country so as to record government atrocities committed against ordinary people, calling for basic democracy. Amazing. A biting analysis of how Washington lied and schemed and thus enabled Vietnam to be bombed and devastated. Incredible. Another about wretched Mexican children having to leave their families, hoping to find a way into the United States and build a life outside of poverty and despair. All three intelligent, moving, great stuff. And the winner was an overly sentimental film about dolphins being killed. Nothing new. Animals are cute. Who are you wearing? Let's hate Mel Gibson. Affectionate and fraternal jokes about Jews and homosexuals. Put-downs of conservatives. Liberal statements about marriage and foreign policy from Susan Sarandon. Sean Penn pretending to be confused and humble when we know it's an act. Applauding the memory of some editor of whom you've never heard when the obituary bit is actually about the stars, and so on and so on and so on. Okay, here are some movies you'll never see coming out of this bog of overindulgence. Big budget blockbusters about the suffering of the Ukrainians when millions were murdered by Stalin, or about the story of how legions of East European Christians, and in particular Poles, perished in the death camps. Star-studded features telling of how mainstream traditional family life is exciting, wonderful, and usually produces well-adjusted and loving people, and that middle America, far from being gross, is in fact grand. Movies about how communists in North America in the 1950s and 1960s wanted to introduce a Soviet system that would have led to oppression and suffering, but were thankfully exposed by brave intelligence and police officers and those politicians who saw through the lies of the left. Movies that do not constantly praise native achievements and denigrate Western culture. Movies that tell genuinely inconvenient truths about climate change mythology. Movies that do not rely on sex and violence because they have nothing to say, rather than sometimes depict sex and violence because it helps them to say something. Here's one in particular that was first proposed to Hollywood almost 20 years ago, but has yet to be made. Now listen to this. And remember, in that time, we've had more bad gangster and bad zombie movies than film actresses have had nose jobs. I said nose jobs. The true story, this is really true and authentic, and it's wonderful, of a US ship torpedoed in the Second World War. Tragedy. There were too few life jackets, so the chaplains, a Protestant minister, a Catholic priest, and a Jewish rabbi, gave their life jackets to other sailors, and the three of them stood on the sinking vessel, arms around each other, and prayed as they died. They won't make that movie. We tolerate the thin glamour and the predictable attitudes, but we really should demand something deeper than this. 3D technology is pointless if we're still given a one-dimensional understanding of life. And as for oil pipelines, let the A-list walk to their parties. You know what? We're going to sell it to the Chinese commies.